Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome back to the fourth part of the Eternal set review for the Fall of Argenport with the Primal cards. So since I unfortunately last time forgot to give you my top 5 Justice cards, since I just added this feature recently, I completely forgot about it. Sorry about that. We'll make up for it now and I'll give you my top 5 Justice before we start with the Primal cards. Okay, so there is Justice. These are the top 5 Justice cards, 4 constructed in my opinion, in no specific order. Vanquish's Blade, just an amazing card, has a lot of utility between Vanquish and making your opponent's stuff void bound, or just at worst being a decent weapon to put on your units, particularly good in aggressive mid-range decks and aggro decks. Sheriff Marley, another amazing card, great way to generate incremental advantage, provide utility with the occasional tribute silence, and just being an annoying Aegis unit. Winchest Merchant is possibly the weakest merchant of all in terms of body, except in the very few specific decks that can make good use of a 2/2 flyer, but the utility of a market is not to be underestimated, and that's why it's still in the top 5. Copper Hull Bracers, a card that I think a lot of people underestimated during the spoiler season, including myself. Like, unlike some other people that I talked to, I still found the card not unplayable and at least interesting, and felt like it could have use in like one specific aggressive deck, sort of. But I think the card is actually much better than that. The card is a really good option for proactive Justice decks to just, turn your board sideways into whatever the opponent has and push ahead massively and generate a lot of momentum and tempo swing. And last but not least, we have the Innocuous Kozul Battle Mage, getting another playable, solid Aegis unit for mid-range and aggressive Justice decks is a big deal, and this is a pretty solid example of an Aegis unit, so pretty happy to see that for these kinds of decks. And as an honorable mention, I added Rigon's Disciple, because I think that card also has a lot of potential. A base 2/3 that virtually can become a 4/3 effectively, and the double damage being even better than that, synergizing with weapons and combat tricks, makes this a really nice and appealing alternative Justice 2-drop that deserves a mention here. Alright, that's it for making up for the top 5 Justice. Let's dive into the Primal cards. Okay, so first we have Clan Standard. This is arguably the best standard by far. First because Clan Tactic is really good, Lightning Strike is a very decent card, and getting that 1 extra damage attached to it is a big difference, because suddenly you can kill a lot more things for the same cost, making this much more impactful, much longer. So that's very important. And the other thing is simply that reactive control decks are best suited for playing standards to begin with, because they can usually afford to play their crest and a standard if they are 2-faction, like in Feln or in Horror Control, for example. So this is amazing and is a perfect addition for 2-faction control decks. And in Limited, this is also one of the better standards. Easy pickup, since it's a solid removal spell and prevents you from being power screwed if you play that in addition to your regular power base. Next we have Gift of Battle. This is kind of a fringe card, but has some nice burst or combo potential in constructed, since giving one of your units Berserk is kind of like giving them double damage for that turn, potentially, or even nicer since you can pair it with double damage. Like, imagine a double damage unit like Rigon's Disciple, giving it Berserk, then you suddenly quadruple all the damage that he deals. Instead of attacking for 2, he attacks for 8. If you add a Finest Hour, he suddenly attacks for 20 instead of 2 or 8. So that's a really big deal, and there is some potential for a kind of deck that abuses this, maybe Ohoru spell-based spells matter aggro deck with all the other spells matter units that we talked about last time, or something like that, or some ambitious deck that is splashing this to try and like one-shot opponents or two-shot opponents and turn this into sort of like an infect style deck for anyone that knows infect in Modern and Magic. And yeah, in Limited I think this is actually worse than in Constructed and a bit underpowered unless you have enough units that benefit from attacking twice because they have a trigger on attack or something like that. Next we have Savage Denial. This I think is unfortunately fairly bad since only a small fraction of spells in enemy decks are fast spells, and the amount of spells that most decks run is already fairly low and the amount of fast spells is even lower. So this is just too narrow, and even for like sideboards or markets most of the time. So yeah, unfortunately too much good removal is non-fast, so this just doesn't make it in Constructed or Limited at all. Next we have Shiver. This is clearly a Limited only card, but in Limited this is an okay card, I would say. 2 damage to an exhausted unit basically makes this a 1 power deal 2 to units after they attacked you at least once, or even after they block to finish them off, since keep in mind blocking also exhausts the blocker, unlike in Magic where blocking doesn't tap your blocker, so that is noteworthy, making this a lot better since you can also finish off blockers with it. The Nightfall is something that I'm kind of unhappy about, as you all well know by now. Nightfall is a bad mechanic, but the card is still fine and Limited. Next we have Snow Rager, pretty weak Berserk guy, the 1/1 for 1 with Berserk, so the Berserk really doesn't do a whole lot, and if you somehow manage to play it later with Tribute you get to draw a Snowball. So yeah, this is pretty bad in Limited and Constructed really. Next we have Substitute. This is actually a pretty interesting card. It also still holds the prize for best artwork in the set. The artwork is just amazingly cute and funny and adorable. I love it. But yeah, transforming a unit into a 3/3 dinosaur with Overwhelm provides some options to deal with certain cards that otherwise would be too problematic. Like I could see trying 1 or 2 of these, for example, in Skycrag Aggro, because it gives you a good way to deal with Sandstorm Titan and Tavrot, for example, without having to run the clunky polymorph, and without just dying to this card in addition to, say, Ankle Cutter. It might not be necessary now that we also got Ankle Cutter, but the card definitely has some fringe potential in Constructed. And in Limited, this is probably even better because you can upgrade small units that are outclassed, you can downgrade opposing bombs. It's just a decent card to have in your deck in Limited usually. Next we have Campfire Watchman. This is kind of interesting, a 2 power 06. If we have sideboards, which we likely won't have in organized play, official organized play, this could be an interesting sideboard card since a 2 power 6 health blocker blocks almost everything, which is a pretty good defensive 2-drop for ground guys. But yeah, without that in the market or just in the main deck, this card is not gonna make it anywhere. In Limited, if your deck is very defensive, this seems like a decent option as a 2-drop if you just wanna survive and win late game. Next we have Changey Stick, I assume it is pronounced. +1/+1 in flying. Decent. Definitely not a constructed card, but in Limited is pretty decent, especially with the Spellcraft giving you a free polymorph to shut down one of the opponent's best cards. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. This is a pretty solid addition to any Limited deck, if you ask me. Next we have Dusk Raider. On Inspire, your units gain Berserk, and it has Nightfall. So yeah, kinda hate Nightfall, can't say it often enough, but given that we have Inspire, we get some extra value out of Nightfall, so that makes it a little less bad. Also, this usually going into an aggressive shell Also makes the Nightfall a bit better for you than for them. But the problem is we still only get a 2 power 2/2, which is pretty bad in Constructed. Like if it was a 2/3, would be a lot better. So I'm not sure how playable this is going to be in Constructed in the end. Maybe it'll make it in this like Horu, Berserk, Spells Matter type deck that I mentioned, if that actually does enough to be a deck, which I'm skeptical of. But outside of that, I don't think it will really make it. Like even in decks like Skycrack Aggro, I think you just have too many better 2-drops. Like you have Outlaw, you have Ankle Cutter, and you have Champion of Fury. There's no room for a vanilla 2/2 basically that gives you some potential value down the line. In Limited, this is a really nice 2-drop in a more aggressive deck. Next we have Gruen Form, another Limited only card. An okay trick, not great in Limited I think, since usually you're especially looking for additional attack in tricks. So getting +1/+4 means your unit survives guaranteed, but in a lot of cases also would mean that your opponent's unit is not dying, since +1 attack often isn't enough to win the combat that you're otherwise losing. So yeah, not great. Next we have Honored Skyguard. That's a pretty sweet card actually. The double Primal is problematic, but getting a 2/2 flyer for 2 with upside is pretty decent, and I would say this is a bit better than Tinker Overseer, which has been a decent card that saw a fair share of play, but basically getting to loot away a bad card and turning this into a 3/3 is pretty nice, and in my opinion makes it slightly better than Tinker Overseer probably, especially because it provides more utility in decks like, say, Haunting Scream decks and stuff like that, or other Reanimator decks. So definitely a card to keep in mind when you're looking for this kind of effect, or just like a solid aggressive unit. And in Limited, 2/2 flyers for 2 are great, even if they cost double Primal. And last but not least, for the first part of the Primal cards, we have Huddled Together, kind of a cute, adorable artwork. Your units get +2 health this turn. Definitely not a constructed card, way too situational and weak for that, and even in Limited I think it's not great, but maybe okay as a filler to blow out random combats when there's a lot of attacking and blocking happening. But yeah, not something that I would actively try to pick up. Okay, that's it for the first part of the Primal cards. See you in a moment with part 2.